The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of Kensington Palace as 7-year-old Prince George William Alexander Lewis sat at the edge of his bed, staring at his new school uniform laid out on the chair. The crisp white shirt, navy blue sweater, and dark trousers looked so different from his usual casual clothes. His stomach felt like it was doing somersaults as he thought about what lay ahead. "George, breakfast is ready," called his mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, from downstairs. Her voice carried that gentle but firm tone that meant business. George slipped off his bed and walked slowly to his wardrobe mirror, practicing the smile his father had taught him for public appearances. But this morning, even his practiced smile felt wobbly. Downstairs in the family kitchen, Prince William was already dressed in a smart, casual outfit, sipping his morning coffee while scrolling through his phone. Princess Charlotte, George's younger sister, was munching on toast with strawberry jam, her own school uniform neat and tidy. She had been at school for 2 years now and acted like she knew everything about it. "Are you nervous, George?" Charlotte asked, swinging her legs from her chair. "I was nervous on my first day, but now I love school. Miss Davies says I'm very good at reading." George nodded, but didn't say much. He picked at his scrambled eggs, his appetite completely gone. His mother noticed immediately and sat down next to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's perfectly normal to feel nervous about starting a new school, sweetheart," Catherine said softly. "Even Daddy was nervous when he started school. Weren't you, William?" Prince William looked up from his phone and nodded seriously. "Absolutely. I remember my first day at Weatherby School. I was so worried that the other children wouldn't like me, or that I'd get lost trying to find my classroom. But you know what I discovered?" George looked up at his father with curious eyes. "What?" "I discovered that almost every other child was just as nervous as I was. And the teachers were so kind and helpful that by lunchtime, I felt much better. By the end of the week, I had made 3 good friends." The family finished breakfast together, and George's personal protection officer, Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell, arrived to discuss the security arrangements for the school run. She was a friendly woman in her 30s who had been with the family for 2 years. George liked her because she always treated him like a normal boy, not like a prince. "Right then, George," Detective Mitchell said with a smile, "are you ready for your big adventure?" George nodded, though his hands were slightly shaky as he put on his new school shoes. They were black and shiny, much more formal than his usual trainers. Catherine helped him with his school blazer, adjusting the collar and smoothing down his hair, which always seemed to stick up at the back no matter what they did to it. The drive to Thomas's Battersea took about 20 minutes through London's busy morning traffic. George sat in the back seat between his parents, watching the city wake up through the tinted windows. Office workers hurried along pavements with coffee cups in their hands. Shop owners opened their doors, and red buses rumbled past carrying people to their daily destinations. "Look, George," Catherine pointed out the window. "See that little park? That's where Daddy and I used to take you when you were little. You loved feeding the ducks there." George smiled at the memory. He remembered the ducks and how they would quack loudly whenever he threw bread into the pond. It felt good to think about happy memories when his stomach was still doing nervous flips. As they got closer to the school, George could see other children walking along the pavements in the same uniform he was wearing. Some were holding their parents' hands. Others were chatting excitedly with friends. A few looked as nervous as George felt. Thomas's Battersea was a beautiful red brick building with tall windows and a welcoming entrance. It had been educating children for over 40 years and was known for its excellent teachers and warm, family-like atmosphere. The school motto, "Be Kind," was displayed prominently above the main entrance. As their car pulled up outside the school gates, George could see several photographers and journalists waiting across the street, held back by police barriers. They had cameras with long lenses and were clearly hoping to get pictures of the young prince on his first day. George had grown up knowing that people were always interested in taking his picture, but it still made him feel self-conscious. "Don't worry about them, George," his father said quietly. "They're just doing their job. You focus on your new school and having a good day." Helen Haslam, the headmistress of Thomas's Battersea, was waiting at the school entrance to greet them. She was a warm, friendly woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had been running the school for 15 years and was known for making every child feel special and valued. "Good morning, Your Royal Highnesses," Mrs. Haslam said with a genuine smile. "And you must be George. We're so excited to welcome you to Thomas's Battersea. Are you ready to meet your new classmates?" George nodded politely, though his voice seemed to have disappeared somewhere in his throat. Catherine squeezed his hand reassuringly. "George is a little nervous, which is completely understandable," Catherine explained. "He's been looking forward to starting school. Haven't you, sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am," George managed to whisper, his royal training kicking in automatically. Mrs. Haslam knelt down to George's level, speaking to him directly. "You know, George, I've been a headmistress for many years, and I can tell you a secret. Some of the best, kindest, and most interesting children I've ever known were nervous on their first day. Being a little nervous just means you care about doing well, and that's a wonderful quality." They walked through the school's bright, colorful corridors together. The walls were covered with children's artwork, photos from school trips, and displays about different subjects the students were learning. George could hear laughter and chatter coming from various classrooms, and it made the school feel alive and happy. "This will be your classroom, George," Mrs. Haslam said, stopping outside a door marked Year 3, Mrs. Thompson. "Mrs. Thompson has been teaching here for 8 years, and she's absolutely wonderful. All the children love her." Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway, as if she had been waiting for them. She was a young teacher in her early 30s with a bright, enthusiastic manner. Her classroom was colorful and welcoming, with reading corners, science displays, and student work covering every available wall space. "Hello, George," Mrs. Thompson said warmly. "I'm so pleased you're joining our class. We've been preparing for your arrival, and the children are very excited to meet you. Would you like to see your desk?" George nodded and followed Mrs. Thompson into the classroom. There were 24 desks arranged in groups of 4, and Mrs. Thompson led him to one near the window. On the desk was a name tag that simply read George and a small welcome pack with pencils, erasers, and a notebook. "This is where you'll sit, next to Oliver, Amelia, and James," Mrs. Thompson explained. "They're all lovely children, and I think you'll get along wonderfully." As if on cue, 3 children appeared at the classroom door. Oliver was a boy with curly red hair and freckles. Amelia had long brown hair and neat plaits, and James was tall for his age with a friendly smile. They all looked curious, but not pushy. "Hello," Oliver said simply. "Are you George? Mrs. Thompson told us you were starting today. Do you like football? We play every break time." George's face lit up for the first time that morning. "Yes, I love football. I support Aston Villa." "Really?" James exclaimed. "That's brilliant. I support Chelsea, but that's okay. We can still be friends." Amelia smiled shyly. "I don't know much about football, but I love reading. Do you like books, George?" "I do," George replied, feeling a bit more confident. "I like adventure stories and books about animals." "Perfect," Amelia said. "I can show you the best books in our classroom library." Catherine and William exchanged relieved glances. Their son was already starting to relax and connect with his new classmates. This was exactly what they had hoped for. Mrs. Haslam showed them the rest of the school facilities while George stayed in the classroom, getting to know his table group. There was a wonderful library with comfortable reading chairs and thousands of books, a science laboratory where older students were conducting experiments, an art room filled with paintings and pottery projects, and a music room where someone was practicing piano. "We believe in developing the whole child here at Thomas's Battersea," Mrs. Haslam explained. "Academic excellence is important, of course, but we also focus on creativity, kindness, and helping each child discover their own special talents and interests." The school had beautiful outdoor spaces, too. There was a playground with climbing equipment and sports markings, gardens where children could grow vegetables and flowers, and a large field where sports activities took place. George would love the outdoor time, Catherine thought, remembering how much energy her son had. "What about security?" Detective Mitchell asked quietly. It was a necessary consideration that came with George's position. "We've worked very closely with your security team to ensure George's safety while maintaining as normal a school experience as possible," Mrs. Haslam replied. The staff have all been briefed and have signed additional confidentiality agreements. We want George to feel like any other student here. Back in the classroom, George was slowly warming up to his new environment. Mrs. Thompson had started the morning with a circle time where each child shared something interesting about their weekend. George found himself talking about a nature walk he had taken with his family, carefully avoiding any details that might reveal too much about his royal lifestyle. "That sounds lovely, George," Mrs. Thompson said. "We're studying habitats and science this term, so you might be able to share some of the things you observed on your walk." The first lesson was mathematics, and George discovered that his new school approached learning in a much more interactive way than his private tutoring had been. Instead of just working through problems in a textbook, Mrs. Thompson had the children work in pairs to solve real-world math problems using manipulatives and visual aids. "George, would you like to work with Oliver on this problem?" Mrs. Thompson suggested. "You need to figure out how many apples each person gets if you have 24 apples to share equally among 6 people." George and Oliver worked together, using small blocks to represent the apples and dividing them into equal groups. It was much more fun than just doing sums on paper, and George found himself really enjoying the challenge. "You're really good at this," Oliver commented as they solved the problem. "Do you like maths?" "I do," George replied. "I like working out how things fit together." "That's cool. Wait until you see what we do in science class. Last week we made volcanoes that actually erupted." George's eyes widened with excitement. At home, his science lessons were usually reading from textbooks or watching educational videos. The idea of making an erupting volcano sounded incredible. When break time arrived, Mrs. Thompson walked the children outside to the playground. George had been looking forward to this moment, but also feeling nervous about it. Playground time could be tricky for any new student, and being a prince added an extra layer of complexity. Right then, Mrs. Thompson announced, "Let's make sure George feels welcome to join any of our games. What would you like to play today?" "Football," called out several children at once, including Oliver and James. "Can I play too?" George asked, his confidence growing. "Of course," Oliver said. "We'll pick teams. I'll be one captain, and James can be the other." The children divided into 2 teams for a friendly match on the school's playground markings. George found himself on Oliver's team, alongside Amelia, who insisted she wanted to try playing even though she usually preferred reading during break. As they played, George began to relax completely for the first time that day. He was a naturally athletic child, and football was one of his favorite activities. His teammates quickly realized he was skilled at the game, but more importantly, he was generous with the ball and encouraged other players when they made good moves. "Nice pass, Amelia," George called out when she successfully kicked the ball to another teammate. "Thanks," Amelia beamed. She was clearly not the most coordinated player, but George's encouragement made her feel good about trying something new. The game was competitive, but friendly, with lots of laughter and good-natured teasing. George scored 2 goals, but also set up several others for his teammates. By the end of break time, he had grass stains on his knees, and his hair was messier than ever, but he was grinning from ear to ear. "That was brilliant," James said as they walked back into the classroom. "You're really good at football, George. Do you play for a team?" George hesitated for a moment, unsure how to answer. He did receive professional coaching at home, but explaining that might reveal more about his lifestyle than was appropriate. "I just practice a lot with my dad," he said finally, which was true enough. After break, the class had English literature, where they were reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. George was familiar with the story from the films, but reading it together as a class and discussing the characters was a completely new experience. "What do you think about Charlie Bucket?" Mrs. Thompson asked the class. "What kind of person is he?" Hands shot up around the room. Amelia spoke first. "He's kind and good, even though his family is very poor. He doesn't give up, even when things are hard," added Oliver. "He cares about other people, not just himself," said James. George listened to his classmates' thoughtful responses and slowly raised his hand. "I think Charlie shows that being good and kind is more important than having lots of money or things." Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful observation, George. Charlie's character teaches us that true wealth comes from our actions and how we treat others, doesn't it?" The discussion continued, with children sharing their thoughts about the other characters in the book. George found himself genuinely engaged in the conversation, enjoying hearing different perspectives and contributing his own ideas. As lunchtime approached, George realized that the morning had flown by much faster than he had expected. He had been so worried about fitting in and being accepted, but his classmates had welcomed him naturally and treated him just like any other new student. Mrs. Thompson gathered the class together before they went to lunch. "I want to say how proud I am of everyone today," she announced. "You've all done a wonderful job of making George feel welcome and including him in our classroom community. That's what being kind is all about." George felt a warm feeling in his chest as he looked around at his new classmates. These children didn't know he was a prince. To them, he was just George, a new boy who liked football and reading and was trying to fit in just like anyone else would. The lunch hall was a large, bright room filled with the chatter of children from all year groups. George joined the queue with his classmates, feeling nervous again about this new social situation. Lunchtime could be particularly challenging for any new student. "The food here is actually quite good," Oliver said, seeing George looking uncertain. "Thursday is the best day because they always serve fish and chips." "What's good today?" George asked, peering at the menu board. "Spaghetti bolognese," Amelia read aloud. "That's one of my favorites." George selected the pasta along with a bread roll and an apple, then followed his table mates to a spot near the windows. The conversation flowed naturally as they ate, covering topics like favorite TV shows, weekend plans, and upcoming school events. "There's a school fair in 2 weeks," James mentioned between bites of his sandwich. "All the families come, and there are games and stalls. It's really fun." "Will your parents come, George?" Amelia asked. George nodded. "I think so. They said they want to meet my teachers and see my classroom." This was exactly the kind of normal family involvement that his parents wanted for him. The chance to participate in regular school events just like any other family. As lunch continued, more children from their class joined their table, curious to meet the new student. George found himself answering questions about his old school. He mentioned being taught at home, his hobbies, football, swimming, and reading, and his family. He had a younger sister and a baby brother. "Do you have any pets?" asked a girl named Sophie. George's face lit up. "We have a dog named Orla. She's a Cocker Spaniel, and she's really playful. She loves chasing tennis balls in the garden." "That's so cool," Sophie exclaimed. "I've been asking my parents for a dog for ages, but they say our flat is too small." The conversation about pets continued, with various children sharing stories about their cats, hamsters, rabbits, and fish. George listened eagerly, enjoying hearing about his classmates' different home lives and experiences. After lunch, there was another short break outside, followed by afternoon lessons. The first was science, which George had been particularly looking forward to since Oliver's mention of the volcano experiment. Mrs. Thompson introduced the day's topic. "Today we're going to learn about states of matter, solids, liquids, and gases. We're going to conduct several experiments to see how matter can change from one state to another." The classroom had been transformed into a mini laboratory, with different stations set up around the room. At one station, there were ice cubes and bowls. At another, there was a kettle safely operated by Mrs. Thompson. And at a third, there were various solid objects like rocks, wooden blocks, and metal spoons. "I want you to work in your table groups," Mrs. Thompson explained. "You'll rotate through each station and record your observations. Think about what happens when we heat ice, what happens when we cool water vapor, and how different materials behave." George's group started at the ice station, where they watched ice cubes slowly melt in warm water, timing how long the process took and observing how the solid ice became liquid water. "This is so much better than just reading about it in a book," George whispered to Oliver. "Wait until we get to the steam station," Oliver whispered back. Mrs. Thompson shows how water vapor condenses back into water droplets. It's like magic. As they moved through the stations, George found himself completely absorbed in the hands-on learning. He carefully recorded observations in his science notebook, drew diagrams of what he saw, and asked thoughtful questions that impressed Mrs. Thompson. "George, you're showing excellent scientific thinking," she commented when he asked why some materials conducted heat faster than others. That's exactly the kind of curiosity that makes a good scientist. The final lesson of the day was art, where the children were working on self-portraits using watercolors. George had always enjoyed drawing and painting at home, but he had usually worked alone with an art tutor. Creating art alongside other children was a completely different and enjoyable experience. The trick with watercolors, explained Mrs. Patterson, the art teacher, is to start with light colors and gradually add darker ones. You can always make something darker, but it's much harder to make it lighter again. George worked carefully on his portrait, mixing colors on his palette and applying them in thin layers. Amelia, who was sitting next to him, was taking a very detailed and precise approach to her painting, while Oliver seemed to be experimenting with bold, bright colors that didn't necessarily match reality. "I like your style, Oliver," George said, admiring his friend's creative use of purple and orange in his hair. "It's very artistic." "Thanks," Oliver beamed. "I don't think art has to look exactly like real life. It's more fun to use colors that show how you feel." George considered this perspective and decided to add some blue highlights to his own hair, not because his hair was actually blue, but because blue was a color that made him feel calm and happy. As the afternoon progressed, George realized that his initial nervousness had completely disappeared. He was genuinely enjoying every aspect of his school experience: the lessons, the social interaction, the hands-on learning, and the feeling of being part of community. Mrs. Thompson began preparing the class for home time, helping children pack up their belongings and organize their homework folders. George was surprised to discover that he felt slightly disappointed the day was ending. He had been so worried about getting through his first day, and now he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. "Don't forget," Mrs. Thompson announced, "tomorrow we're starting our project about different countries around the world. I want each of you to choose a country you'd like to research and present to the class next week." George's mind immediately began racing with possibilities. He had traveled to several countries with his family and had learned about many others through his geography lessons. The challenge would be choosing just one to focus on. "What country are you going to pick?" Amelia asked as they packed up their art supplies. "I'm not sure yet," George replied honestly. "Maybe somewhere I've never been but would like to visit." "What about you?" "Japan," Amelia said immediately. "I love Japanese art and stories, and I want to learn about their culture." "That's a brilliant choice," George said. "I'd love to learn about Japan too." As the children prepared to leave, parents began arriving to collect them. George could see his mother waiting outside through the classroom window, chatting pleasantly with Mrs. Haslam and some other parents. Detective Mitchell was nearby, but maintaining a discreet distance. Oliver's mother appeared at the classroom door, a friendly-looking woman in casual clothes who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. When Oliver introduced George to her, she smiled warmly and treated him just like any of her son's other friends. "Oliver's told me so much about you already," she said to George. "He said you're very good at football. You must come over for a play date soon if your parents are happy with that." George's face lit up. A play date with a school friend. It was exactly the kind of normal childhood experience his parents wanted him to have. "I'd really like that," George replied politely. "I'll ask my mom and dad." As the children said their goodbyes and began leaving with their parents, George felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. His first day at Thomas's Battersea had exceeded all his expectations. He had made friends, enjoyed his lessons, and, most importantly, felt accepted and valued for who he was as an individual. Mrs. Thompson approached him as he gathered his things. "George, I just wanted to say how proud I am of how well you've settled in today. You've been kind, thoughtful, and a wonderful addition to our classroom community." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," George replied. "I really liked today. Everyone was very nice to me." "That's wonderful to hear. I have a feeling you're going to love it here at Thomas's Battersea." George walked out of the classroom with a spring in his step, eager to share his experiences with his parents and already looking forward to tomorrow's lessons. His first day at school had been everything he had hoped for and more, a perfect beginning to what he sensed would be an important and exciting chapter in his young life. 3 weeks had passed since George's first day at Thomas's Battersea, and the young prince had settled into school life with remarkable ease. The initial nervousness had completely disappeared, replaced by genuine excitement each morning when he put on his school uniform. What had once felt strange and formal now felt like putting on the clothes of belonging. This particular Wednesday morning was special because George's class was going on their first educational trip of the term. They were visiting the Natural History Museum in South Kensington, just a short journey from school, but a world away in terms of the wonders it contained. George had been looking forward to this trip for 2 weeks, ever since Mrs. Thompson had announced it during their science lesson about dinosaurs. The coach journey to the museum was filled with excited chatter from all 24 children in Year 3. George sat next to Oliver, with Amelia and James across the aisle. They had become an inseparable group over the past few weeks, bonding over shared interests and complementary personalities. Oliver's humor and energy balanced perfectly with Amelia's thoughtfulness and James's natural leadership abilities. "I can't wait to see the dinosaur skeletons," Oliver said, pressing his face against the coach window as they drove through London's busy streets. "My dad says they have a T-Rex that's so big it could eat a whole elephant." "That's not quite accurate," Amelia said gently, consulting the guidebook she had borrowed from the school library. Tyrannosaurus rex lived millions of years before elephants existed, but they were definitely enormous predators. George smiled at his friend's different approaches to learning. Oliver's enthusiasm was infectious, while Amelia's attention to detail helped them all understand things more clearly. "I'm excited about the geology section," he added. "I've been reading about how different rocks form, and they have samples from all over the world." "You would be interested in rocks," James teased good-naturedly. "But actually, that does sound quite cool. Maybe we can see some meteorites, too." Mrs. Thompson stood up at the front of the coach as they approached the museum. "Right, everyone, listen carefully. We're going to split into groups of 4 for the visit. You'll stay with your table groups, and each group will have a different starting point. George's group will begin in the Earth Hall, then move to the Dinosaur Gallery." The Natural History Museum's grand entrance hall took everyone's breath away. The massive Dippy the Diplodocus skeleton dominated the space, its long neck stretching up toward the beautiful domed ceiling. Children from George's class stood in awed silence for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnificence of the building and its contents. "It's incredible," George whispered, craning his neck to take in the full scale of the dinosaur skeleton above them. Their first stop was the Earth Hall, where interactive displays explained how the planet formed and evolved over billions of years. George was fascinated by the section on volcanoes, remembering the erupting volcano experiment they had done in class several weeks earlier. "Look at this," Amelia called out, standing in front of a display about the formation of precious stones. "It says that diamonds form deep underground under enormous pressure over millions of years." The group gathered around the display, reading about how carbon atoms arrange themselves into crystal structures under specific conditions. George found himself thinking about the science behind the crown jewels, though he kept that connection to himself. "That's amazing," Oliver said. "Imagine waiting millions of years for a diamond to form, and then someone digs it up and puts it in a ring." "Actually," James added, reading from another panel, "most diamonds we see in jewelry are much older than the human species. We're wearing pieces of ancient Earth history." Their museum guide, an enthusiastic young woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, appeared to lead them to their next section. She was a geology expert who had worked at the museum for 5 years and had a talent for making complex scientific concepts accessible to children. "I hear you've been discussing diamonds," Dr. Chin said with a smile. "That's perfect timing because I'm about to show you some real specimens. But first, can anyone tell me what they think is the hardest natural substance on Earth?" Several hands shot up, including George's. "Diamond," he said when Dr. Chin called on him. "Exactly right. And do you know why diamonds are so hard?" George thought for a moment, remembering something he had read in a science book at home. "Because of how the carbon atoms are connected to each other, they form a very strong structure." "Brilliant explanation," Dr. Chin said. "The carbon atoms form what we call a crystal lattice, where each carbon atom is bonded to 4 others in a 3-dimensional network. It's like an incredibly strong molecular cage." She led them to a display case containing various mineral specimens, including several diamonds in their raw, uncut state. The children were amazed to see that natural diamonds didn't look anything like the sparkling gems they were familiar with from jewelry. They looked like pieces of glass. Amelia observed, studying the rough, translucent stones. "That's a very good observation," Dr. Chen replied. "Cutting and polishing diamonds to make them sparkle is a skill that takes years to master. The way light reflects and refracts through the cut surfaces is what creates that famous diamond brilliance." George found himself completely absorbed in the scientific explanations. At home, his tutors had taught him about geology and mineralogy, but experiencing it in person with his friends made the learning feel much more meaningful and enjoyable. Their next stop was the dinosaur gallery, which proved to be even more exciting than the children had anticipated. The gallery was designed to take visitors through the age of dinosaurs, with life-size models, fossilized skeletons, and interactive displays that brought these ancient creatures to life. The centerpiece was an enormous baryonyx skeleton, a fish-eating dinosaur that had been discovered in Surrey just a few decades earlier. The skeleton was displayed in a hunting pose, its massive claws extended and its long snout filled with sharp teeth. "This one lived right here in England," Dr. Chen explained. "About 125 million years ago, this area was covered by warm, shallow seas and river deltas. Perfect hunting grounds for a dinosaur that specialized in catching fish." Oliver was practically bouncing with excitement. "It's like a giant crocodile with legs." "That's actually not a bad comparison," Dr. Chen laughed. Baryonyx did have some crocodile-like features, especially its long snout and fish-eating habits. But it was much larger and walked on two legs most of the time. James was studying the information panel carefully. "It says here that they found fish scales in the stomach area of the first baryonyx skeleton. How did fish scales survive for 125 million years?" "Excellent question," Dr. Chen replied. "Fossils form under very specific conditions. When an animal dies and is quickly buried in sediment, the organic material slowly gets replaced by minerals. Sometimes we get incredibly detailed preservation that includes stomach contents." George was fascinated by the forensic aspect of paleontology, how scientists could reconstruct the lives and behaviors of creatures that had been extinct for millions of years. "Do you think dinosaurs were actually colorful like the birds we see today?" he asked. Dr. Chen's eyes lit up. "That's one of the most exciting areas of current research. Scientists have actually started to identify fossil pigment cells in some dinosaur feathers and skin. We now know that some dinosaurs had brilliant reds, blues, and other colors just like modern birds." The group spent nearly an hour in the dinosaur gallery, exploring different species and learning about how life on Earth had evolved and changed over geological time. George was particularly drawn to the section on extinction events, trying to imagine what it would have been like when the asteroid impact ended the age of dinosaurs. "It's sad that they all died out," Amelia said quietly as they looked at a display about the Cretaceous extinction event. "But if they hadn't," James pointed out, "mammals might never have evolved to become as diverse as they are today, including humans." "That's a very thoughtful observation," Dr. Chen said. "Extinction events, while tragic for the species involved, often create opportunities for other forms of life to evolve and diversify. It's one of the ways that life on Earth keeps changing and adapting." After their guided tour, the children had free time to explore the museum at their own pace. George's group decided to visit the Mammals Gallery, where they could learn about the evolution of human ancestors and see how different mammal species had adapted to various environments around the world. The display on human evolution was particularly fascinating. Skulls and reconstructions showed the gradual changes that led from early ape-like ancestors to modern humans over millions of years. George studied the timeline carefully, trying to comprehend the vast spans of time involved. "It's amazing to think that all humans today are descended from the same ancestors," Amelia mused as they looked at a reconstruction of early human migration patterns around the world. "And that we're still evolving," Oliver added. "My dad says humans are getting taller on average than they were 100 years ago." Dr. Chun, who had been following their group at a distance, overheard this comment. "Your friend is absolutely right," she said, joining their conversation. "Human evolution hasn't stopped. It's just happening over timescales that are hard for us to notice in our daily lives. George thought about this concept as they explored more of the gallery. The idea that change and adaptation were constant processes in nature seemed to apply to his own life too. He was adapting to school life, making new friendships, and learning to balance his royal responsibilities with being a normal child. Lunchtime was spent in the museum's picnic area, where all the children from Thomas's Battersea gathered to share their packed lunches and compare notes about what they had seen. George sat with his usual group, but found himself also talking to children from other table groups who were excited to share their discoveries. The whale skeleton in the mammals gallery is absolutely massive, reported Sophie, a girl from another table group. It takes up an entire room. We saw fossilized dinosaur eggs, added Marcus, Oliver's friend from the football team. Some of them still had baby dinosaur bones inside. George contributed his own observations about the geology displays and the volcanic rock samples, while Amelia shared fascinating facts about prehistoric mammals that had lived alongside the dinosaurs. The enthusiasm was infectious, with each child building on the other's excitement about what they had learned. Mrs. Thompson moved between the groups, listening to the children's conversations and taking notes for follow-up lessons back at school. She was delighted to see how engaged and curious her students were, asking thoughtful questions and making connections between different areas of science. "I can already see some excellent project ideas emerging from today's visit," she announced to the group. "When we get back to school, we're going to start working on research presentations about something that particularly interested you today." After lunch, they had one more guided activity, a hands-on workshop in the museum's educational center where children could handle real fossil specimens and learn about the process of fossilization. George was amazed to hold a 150-million-year-old ammonite fossil in his hands, feeling the weight of geological history. This ammonite lived in ancient seas that covered much of Europe, explained Dr. Martinez, the workshop leader. The spiral shell helped it control its buoyancy as it swam through the water, just like a submarine adjusting its ballast tanks. The children were given magnifying glasses to examine the details of various fossils, including trilobites, ancient sea creatures that had lived for nearly 300 million years before becoming extinct. George was struck by how well-preserved some of the specimens were, showing intricate details of legs, eyes, and body segments. Trilobites were some of the first animals to develop complex eyes, Dr. Martinez explained. Some species had compound eyes made up of thousands of individual lenses, giving them excellent vision for hunting and avoiding predators. Oliver held up a particularly detailed trilobite fossil. "It looks like an alien from a science fiction film." "That's not surprising," Dr. Martinez laughed. Many science fiction designers actually base their alien creatures on real fossil animals. Life on Earth has produced some incredibly strange and wonderful forms over the past 500 million years. The workshop concluded with each child being given a small fossil specimen to take home, a genuine piece of ancient history that they could keep as a reminder of their museum visit. George carefully wrapped his trilobite fossil in tissue paper, already planning to show it to his sister Charlotte and baby brother Louis when he got home. As they prepared to return to school, George reflected on how much he had learned in just one day. The museum visit had brought his science textbooks to life, showing him real examples of the concepts he had been studying in class. More importantly, he had shared the experience with friends who were just as curious and excited about learning as he was. The coach journey back to school was filled with animated discussions about everything they had seen. George found himself in the role of science expert, answering questions from his classmates about some of the geological concepts that had particularly interested him. He enjoyed being able to contribute knowledge while also learning from his friends' different perspectives and observations. "George, you know so much about rocks and minerals," Amelia observed. "Have you been to other museums before?" George thought carefully about how to answer. He had indeed visited many museums around the world with his family, but explaining that might reveal more about his background than was appropriate for school. "My family likes visiting educational places," he said finally. "Museums and historical sites are some of my favorite places to go." "That's so cool," James said. "My family usually just goes to the beach for holidays. Though I suppose beaches are geological too, when you think about it." Absolutely. George agreed enthusiastically. Beaches are constantly changing as waves erode rocks and deposit sand. And the sand itself is made up of tiny pieces of weathered rock and shells. Mrs. Thompson, who was sitting nearby, smiled as she listened to her students' conversation. This was exactly the kind of intellectual engagement and peer learning that made school trips so valuable. The children weren't just absorbing information passively. They were actively discussing, questioning, and building on each other's understanding. Back at school, the remainder of the afternoon was spent in reflection and planning activities. Mrs. Thompson had the children write in their science journals about their favorite discovery of the day, encouraging them to think not just about what they had seen, but how it connected to things they already knew. George wrote about the connection between the geological processes that formed different types of rocks and the environmental conditions that existed millions of years ago. He was fascinated by how scientists could read the history of Earth like a book, with each rock layer telling a story about ancient climates, landscapes, and life forms. "I never realized that rocks could tell us so much about the past," he wrote in his neat handwriting. "The limestone formations showed us that England was once covered by warm tropical seas, and the volcanic rocks revealed periods when the Earth was much more geologically active than it is today." Amelia, working at the desk next to him, was writing about the evolution of vision in ancient animals. "It's amazing that trilobites developed such sophisticated eyes so early in the history of complex life," she wrote. "It makes me wonder what other incredible adaptations existed in ancient creatures that we haven't discovered yet." Oliver was illustrating his journal entry with detailed drawings of the dinosaur skeletons they had seen, adding his own creative interpretations of what the living animals might have looked like. His artistic approach to science was uniquely his own, combining accurate observation with imaginative reconstruction. James focused on the detective work aspect of paleontology, writing about how scientists used evidence from fossils to reconstruct the behavior and lifestyle of extinct animals. "Finding fish scales in a dinosaur's stomach is like solving a 125-million-year-old mystery," he wrote. As the school day ended, George realized that the museum trip had been much more than just an educational outing. It had been a shared adventure that deepened his friendships and showed him how learning could be exciting and collaborative. The experience of discovering new things alongside his classmates was completely different from the individual tutoring he had received before starting school. Walking out to meet his mother at the end of the day, George carried his fossil specimen carefully in his school bag along with his filled journal and a head full of new knowledge. He was already looking forward to sharing everything he had learned with his family and continuing his research for the presentation project Mrs. Thompson had assigned. Catherine was waiting by the school gates with her usual warm smile, chatting pleasantly with other parents who were collecting their children. George could see that she had been talking to Oliver's mother again, and he felt pleased that the adults were forming the same kind of natural friendships that the children were developing. "How was your museum trip, sweetheart?" Catherine asked as they walked to their car. "Absolutely brilliant," George replied enthusiastically. "We saw real dinosaur skeletons and held fossils that are millions of years old. And I learned so much about how rocks form and how scientists can tell what happened in the past by studying them." Catherine listened with genuine interest as George recounted the details of his day, asking questions that showed she was paying close attention to his enthusiastic descriptions. This was exactly what she and William had hoped for when they chose Thomas's Battersea, an environment where George could experience the joy of learning alongside other children who shared his curiosity about the world. "It sounds like you had a wonderful time," Catherine said. "I can't wait to hear more about it at dinner tonight. Did you make any plans with your friends for future projects?" "Yes. Oliver wants to research volcanoes for his presentation, and Amelia is going to focus on prehistoric marine life. James is thinking about doing something on how fossils form. We might work together on some aspects since our topics are connected." The drive home was filled with George's continued excitement about the day's discoveries. He showed Catherine his trilobite fossil, explaining what Dr. Martinez had taught them about compound eyes and ancient sea life. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Catherine found herself genuinely fascinated by the scientific concepts her young son was describing with such precision and passion. As they arrived at Kensington Palace, George was already planning how he would research his presentation topic and thinking about what books he might find in the palace library that would help him understand more about geological history. The museum visit had sparked a deeper interest in earth sciences that went far beyond completing a school assignment. At dinner that evening, George regaled his entire family with stories from the museum trip. Princess Charlotte listened with wide eyes to his descriptions of enormous dinosaur skeletons, while baby Prince Louis babbled happily in his high chair, seeming to sense his big brother's excitement even if he couldn't understand the words. Prince William was particularly interested in George's observations about human evolution and the detective work involved in paleontology. "It sounds like you're developing quite an interest in science," he observed. "Have you thought about what you might want to study when you're older?" George considered this question seriously. "I think I'd like to learn about lots of different things. Today made me realize how much there is to discover about the world. Maybe I could be a scientist who studies how the Earth works, or maybe an explorer who finds new fossils." Catherine and William exchanged pleased glances. Their son was developing his own interests and passions, discovering what excited him through direct experience and exploration. This was exactly the kind of personal growth they had hoped school would provide, the chance for George to learn about himself as well as about the world around him. As the evening wound down, George spent time carefully arranging his trilobite fossil on his bedroom shelf alongside other treasures he had collected. The fossil would serve as a daily reminder of his wonderful day at the museum and the excitement of learning alongside his friends. Looking out his bedroom window at the lights of London, George felt grateful for the opportunities he was having at Thomas's Battersea. School was providing him with much more than just academic knowledge. It was giving him friendships, shared experiences, and a growing understanding of his own interests and abilities. Tomorrow would bring new lessons and new opportunities to learn, but tonight George was content to relive the day's adventures and plan for the research project that would let him delve even deeper into the fascinating world of geology and Earth history. His first major school trip had been everything he had hoped for and more, opening up new possibilities for learning and discovery that extended far beyond the classroom walls. 2 months into the school term, Thomas's Battersea was buzzing with excitement as the annual Christmas performance preparations began in earnest. George had been looking forward to this event ever since Mrs. Thompson announced that Year 3 would be performing a nativity play with a modern twist, combining traditional elements with contemporary music and storytelling techniques. The casting had taken place the previous week, and George found himself with the role of one of the wise men, specifically Melchior, who traditionally brought gold as a gift. He was thrilled with this assignment, partly because it meant he would work closely with Oliver and James, who were playing the other 2 wise men, and partly because he genuinely enjoyed the dramatic aspects of storytelling. Right then, "Wise men," announced Miss Davies, the drama teacher who was directing the production. "Today we're going to work on your entrance scene. Remember, you've been following a star for months, you're tired from traveling, but you're also filled with excitement because you've finally reached your destination." The 3 boys stood at the back of the school hall, wearing the beginnings of their costumes, flowing robes, and elaborate headdresses that the parent volunteers had been working on for weeks. George felt a familiar flutter of nervous excitement in his stomach, the same feeling he got before important royal engagements, but this was different because he was sharing it with his friends. "How do you think wise men would walk?" Oliver asked, experimenting with long, measured steps. "Probably quite dignified, right? But also tired," James added, affecting a slight slump to his shoulders. They've been traveling for ages. George thought about this carefully. In his royal training, he had learned about carrying himself with dignity and purpose, but he had also watched many theatrical performances at various royal events. "Maybe we start tired and then get more excited as we see the star getting brighter," he suggested. Miss Davies clapped her hands in approval. "Excellent thinking, George. That's exactly the kind of character development that makes a performance engaging. You start weary, but grow more animated as you realize you're approaching your destination." The boys practiced their entrance several times, working on coordinating their movements and developing the sense of shared purpose that would make their characters believable. George found himself drawing on his experience of formal processions and ceremonial events, but adapting those skills to create a character who was both dignified and human. "Brilliant work, boys," Miss Davies said after their fourth run-through. "You're really beginning to embody these characters. Now, let's work on your dialogue with Mary and Joseph." Amelia had been cast as the narrator, a role that allowed her to showcase her excellent reading skills while helping to guide the audience through the story. She had been practicing her lines diligently, and George was impressed by how confidently she delivered the complex narrative passages that connected the different scenes. And so the three wise men, having followed the star across many lands, finally arrived in Bethlehem. Amelia read from her script, her clear voice carrying easily across the hall. They came bearing gifts fit for a king, but they found something far more precious: hope for all humanity. The children playing Mary and Joseph, a girl named Emma, and a boy called David from another table group, were positioned center stage with a doll representing baby Jesus. They had been working hard on conveying the wonder and humility of their characters, and George was struck by how seriously all his classmates were taking their roles. "Remember," Miss Davies coached, "this isn't just about remembering your lines. It's about telling a story that has meant something to people for thousands of years. You want your audience to feel the magic and importance of this moment." When it came time for the wise men to present their gifts, George stepped forward with a small, ornate box representing gold. "We bring gold, for this child shall be a king unlike any other," he said, trying to put the right amount of reverence and awe into his voice. "Frankincense, for this child shall be a bridge between heaven and earth," Oliver continued, holding up his own ceremonial container. "And myrrh, because this child shall know both joy and sorrow, as all great leaders must," James concluded, completing their trio of offerings. Miss Davies smiled warmly. "Beautiful delivery, boys. You can hear the respect and wonder in your voices. That's exactly the emotion we want to convey." After drama practice, the children returned to their regular classroom for mathematics, but the excitement from rehearsal carried over into their academic work. Mrs. Thompson had cleverly tied their math lesson to the Christmas theme, creating word problems that involved calculating distances traveled by wise men, determining how much money was needed for costumes and props, and working out timing for the various scenes. If the wise men traveled 15 miles per day and their journey took 45 days, how far did they travel in total? Mrs. Thompson asked the class. George's hand shot up immediately. The mathematics was straightforward. 15 times 45 equaled 675 miles. But he found himself thinking beyond the calculation to the real experience such a journey would have involved. 675 miles, he answered confidently. But, Mrs. Thompson, that would have been an incredibly difficult journey in those days, wouldn't it? No cars or trains, just walking or riding camels through deserts and mountains. Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly. Excellent mathematical work, George, and you're absolutely right about the challenges. Can anyone else think about what supplies they would have needed for such a long journey? Hands shot up around the classroom as children began calculating food, water, and equipment requirements for a 45-day expedition. George found himself fascinated by the logistical complexity of ancient travel, drawing connections between the mathematical concepts they were learning and the historical realities behind the nativity story. They would have needed to plan very carefully, Amelia observed, and they probably had to trade for supplies in different towns along the way. "That's a great point," Mrs. Thompson said. "Trading involves mathematics too, calculating exchange rates, determining fair prices, and keeping track of remaining resources." The lesson continued with increasingly complex problems that required the children to think about practical applications of mathematics in real-world scenarios. George appreciated how Mrs. Thompson consistently connected their academic work to broader concepts and experiences, making the learning feel relevant and meaningful. During break time, the conversation naturally turned to the upcoming performance and the excitement building among all the children's families. George had learned that many of his classmates' grandparents and extended family members would be attending, making it a significant event for the entire school community. "My grandmother is coming down from Scotland specially for the performance," Oliver shared as they walked around the playground. She hasn't seen me in a school play before, so I really want to do a good job. That's so lovely, Amelia said. My whole family will be there, parents, grandparents, and my baby cousin. I hope I don't forget my lines with everyone watching. James nodded sympathetically. I always get nervous performing in front of people I know. It's weird how it feels more scary than performing for strangers. George understood this feeling completely. In his royal role, he often found formal ceremonies less nerve-wracking than family gatherings where people who knew him well were watching his behavior. Maybe we can practice together outside of school, he suggested. If we're really confident with our lines and movements, we won't have to worry about anything else. That's a brilliant idea, Oliver agreed enthusiastically. We could meet up this weekend and run through our scenes. George felt a warm glow at this suggestion. The idea of spending weekend time with his school friends, working together on a shared project, represented exactly the kind of normal childhood experience his parents wanted him to have. I'll ask my mom and Dad if he can come over, he offered. The afternoon brought art class, where they were creating backdrop scenery for the nativity performance. George's group had been assigned to work on the stable scene, using large sheets of cardboard, paint, and various crafting materials to create a believable setting for the central action of the play. We need to make it look authentic, but also visible from the back of the hall, explained Mrs. Patterson, the art teacher. Think about the colors and details that will help tell the story effectively. George found himself taking a leadership role in planning the backdrop design, drawing on his experience visiting historical sites and ancient buildings with his family. He suggested using warm, earthy colors to create a sense of humility and simplicity, while adding strategic touches of gold and deep blue to suggest the divine nature of the events taking place. George has some really good ideas about historical architecture, Amelia observed as they worked on painting wooden beams and stone textures. It's like he's actually seen buildings from that time period. I visited some very old churches and historical sites, George replied carefully. You can learn a lot about how people lived in different time periods by looking at the buildings they left behind. Oliver was working on painting stars for the night sky portion of the backdrop, experimenting with different techniques to make them seem bright and magical. I want the Star of Bethlehem to really stand out, he explained. It should be the kind of star that would make people drop everything and follow it across the world. What if we use some glitter or reflective material, suggested James. Something that would catch the stage lights and actually sparkle during the performance. Mrs. Patterson overheard this conversation and smiled approvingly. Excellent creative thinking, James. We have some metallic paint that would create exactly that effect. The key is making sure the star draws the audience's eye without being too distracting from the actors. As they worked on the scenery, George found himself thinking about the collaborative nature of theater and how many different skills and talents were required to create a successful performance. Beyond the actors and their lines, there were costumes, scenery, music, lighting, and coordination, a complex project that required everyone to contribute their best work. It's amazing how much goes into putting on a play, he commented to his table mates as they painted. Everyone has to do their part well for the whole thing to work. That's true of lots of things, isn't it? Amelia replied thoughtfully. Like how our classroom works best when everyone participates and helps each other. George nodded, thinking about how this principle applied to royal duties as well. Even the most formal state ceremonies required countless people working behind the scenes, security personnel, protocol officers, catering staff, transportation coordinators, and many others. Success always depended on teamwork and mutual support. The final lesson of the day was music, where they practiced the songs that would accompany their nativity performance. Miss Wright, the music teacher, had chosen a mix of traditional carols and contemporary pieces that would appeal to audiences of all ages. Silent Night remained the same beautiful melody that had been sung for centuries, but Miss Wright had arranged it for different vocal parts that would showcase the children's developing musical abilities. George had been placed in the alto section, where his clear, steady voice helped anchor the harmonies. Remember, this isn't just about hitting the right notes, Miss Wright explained as they practiced. You're telling a story through music, conveying emotions that words alone might not capture. As they sang together, George felt the powerful sense of unity that comes from collective musical performance. 24 young voices blending together created something greater than any individual contribution, and he found himself moved by the beauty of what they were creating as a group. The rehearsal concluded with a full run-through of the musical numbers in performance order, giving everyone a sense of how the evening would flow. George was impressed by how much progress his classmates had made in just a few weeks of practice, and he felt confident that their performance would be something their families could be truly proud of. Walking out to meet his mother at the end of the day, George carried a folder of musical arrangements and a paint-stained smock that testified to his productive afternoon in art class. His head was full of melodies, dialogue snippets, and the excitement of upcoming performance. Catherine was waiting in her usual spot by the school gates, and George could see that she had been chatting with several other parents about the Christmas performance. The adult excitement and anticipation seemed to match the children's enthusiasm, creating a wonderful sense of community involvement. "How were rehearsals today?" Catherine asked as they walked to their car. "Really good," George replied enthusiastically. "We're starting to feel like real wise men, and the music is sounding beautiful. Miss Davies says we're ahead of schedule with our preparation." "That's wonderful to hear. Your father and I are so looking forward to seeing the performance. Have you invited any of your friends over to practice together?" George's face lit up. "Actually, I was hoping Oliver, Amelia, and James could come over this weekend to run through our scenes. Would that be possible?" Catherine smiled warmly. "I think that sounds like an excellent idea. I'll speak with their parents and arrange something. It will be lovely to have your friends visit." The drive home was filled with George's continued excitement about the performance preparations and his growing confidence in his role. He described the backdrop painting project, the musical arrangements they had been practicing, and his ideas for making his wise man character more authentic and engaging. "It sounds like you're really thinking deeply about your character," Catherine observed. "What do you think motivates the wise men in this story?" George considered this question seriously. "I think there were people who valued truth and wisdom above comfort and safety. They were willing to make a difficult journey because they believed they would find something important at the end of it." "That's a very mature interpretation," Catherine replied. "And it sounds like those are qualities you admire in people." "I do," George agreed. "I think being willing to seek out new experiences and learn from them is one of the most important things a person can do." Catherine felt a surge of pride at her son's thoughtful response. His school experience was clearly helping him develop not just academic skills and friendships, but also deeper thinking about values, character, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. At dinner that evening, George shared the day's experiences with his entire family, demonstrating some of the wise men's movements and singing portions of the musical arrangements they had been practicing. Princess Charlotte clapped enthusiastically at his performance, while baby Prince Louis seemed fascinated by the musical elements. "Will I be in a Christmas play when I start school?" Charlotte asked hopefully. "I'm sure you will," George replied with the authority of someone who had now mastered the complexities of school theatrical productions. "And I'll help you practice your lines if you want." Prince William listened with obvious pleasure to George's detailed accounts of rehearsal activities and creative collaboration. "It sounds like you're learning about much more than just performing," he observed. "You're discovering how to work with others toward a shared goal." "Yes," George agreed. "And everyone has different strengths that make the whole performance better. Oliver is really creative with visual ideas. Amelia understands the story aspects really well, and James is good at organizing and planning things." Catherine and William exchanged pleased glances. Their son was learning valuable lessons about teamwork, appreciation for others' talents, and the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than himself. These were exactly the kinds of social and emotional skills they had hoped school would help him develop. As the evening progressed, George spent time in his room practicing his lines and thinking about his character's motivations. He wanted to understand not just what to say and when to move, but why the wise man he was portraying would have made the choices described in the story. Looking out his bedroom window at the evening lights of London, George felt grateful for the opportunity to be part of such a meaningful project with his friends. The Christmas performance was becoming much more than just a school requirement. It was a chance to explore important themes about seeking truth, showing respect, and finding wonder in unexpected places. The weekend playdate with his friends would give them a chance to refine their performance together, but George was equally excited about simply spending time with Oliver, Amelia, and James outside of school. These friendships had become an important part of his life, providing him with companions who shared his curiosity about the world and his excitement about learning new things. Tomorrow would bring another day of rehearsals and preparation, but tonight George was content to reflect on how much he was enjoying this collaborative creative project. The Christmas performance was helping him discover new aspects of his own abilities while deepening his appreciation for the diverse talents of his classmates. As he drifted off to sleep, George's mind was filled with visions of stars, ancient journeys, and the magic that could be created when people work together toward a meaningful goal. His school experience continued to exceed all his initial expectations, providing him with opportunities for growth, friendship, and discovery that extended far beyond traditional academic subjects. The weekend rehearsal session would be another step forward in his development as both a performer and a friend, and George was eager to see how much more they could accomplish when they had extended time to practice and explore their characters together. The Christmas performance was shaping up to be a wonderful celebration of everything he had come to love about his life at Thomas's Battersea. The night of the Christmas performance had finally arrived, and Thomas's Battersea was transformed into a magical venue filled with excited families, twinkling decorations, and an atmosphere of anticipation that seemed to crackle in the air. George stood backstage with his fellow wise men, adjusting his elaborate costume for the final time while trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building all day. "How do I look?" Oliver asked, turning around to show off his magnificent robes. The parent volunteers had outdone themselves with the costumes, flowing fabrics in rich colors, ornate headdresses adorned with jewels, and props that looked authentic enough to belong in a museum. Like a proper wise man, George replied honestly. Oliver's costume was primarily deep purple with gold trim, giving him a regal appearance that perfectly suited his character. "You all look brilliant." James was making final adjustments to his own robes, which were a striking combination of midnight blue and silver. "I can't believe how many people are out there," he said, peering through a gap in the curtains at the packed auditorium. "The whole school hall is completely full." George had already seen the audience during their final sound check. The hall was indeed filled to capacity with families, grandparents, younger siblings, and even some local dignitaries who had connections to the school. He had spotted his own parents in the third row, with Catherine looking elegant in a festive red dress and William wearing a smart navy suit. Princess Charlotte was sitting between them, practically bouncing with excitement to see her big brother perform. "Places, everyone," called Miss Davies, appearing backstage with a clipboard and a headset microphone. "Wise men, you're on in about 10 minutes. Remember everything we practiced, and, most importantly, enjoy yourselves out there." The performance had begun 20 minutes earlier with the narrator setting the scene and the angels announcing the birth of Jesus to the shepherds. From backstage, George and his friends had been listening to their classmates deliver their lines with confidence and emotion, creating a magical atmosphere that had the audience completely engaged. Amelia's clear voice had carried beautifully through the hall as she guided everyone through the story, her narration weaving together the different scenes with wisdom and grace that impressed everyone who heard her. George felt proud of his friend's accomplishment and grateful to be part of such a talented group of performers. "Right, boys," whispered Mrs. Thompson, who was helping coordinate the backstage logistics. "You're absolutely ready for this. Just remember to speak clearly, move with purpose, and trust in all the preparation you've done." George took a deep breath and centered himself the way he had been taught for royal appearances. But this felt different from formal ceremonies. This was about bringing a character to life, telling a story that had meaning, and sharing that experience with friends who had worked just as hard as he had. "Let's do this," James said quietly, and the three boys moved into position at the side entrance to the hall. The music began, a haunting melody that suggested long journeys across desert landscapes under starlit skies. Miss Wright had chosen the perfect accompaniment to establish the mood for the wise men's entrance, and George felt his character take over as the first notes filled the air. They began their carefully choreographed entrance, walking with the measured dignity of travelers who had been following a star for months, but were now approaching their destination with growing excitement. George had drawn on his experience of formal processions, but he had adapted those skills to create a character who was both royal and human, powerful yet humble before the mystery they were approaching. Behold, Amelia's voice rang out as narrator. From the far corners of the earth, 3 wise men have followed the star that announced the birth of a king unlike any other. The 3 boys reached their positions on stage, and George felt a moment of perfect clarity. The bright lights, the sea of faces in the audience, the weight of his costume. Everything felt exactly right. He was ready to deliver the performance he and his friends had worked so hard to perfect. For many months, we have traveled. George began, his clear voice carrying easily to the back of the hall, following a star that appeared in the heavens to announce the birth of one who would change the world forever. We have crossed mountains and deserts, Oliver continued, faced dangers and hardships because we knew that what awaited us would be worth any sacrifice. And now, James concluded, we have arrived in Bethlehem, guided by the same star that has led us across continents, to offer our gifts to the promised king. The 3 boys moved forward together toward the stable scene where Emma and David, playing Mary, and Joseph waited with baby Jesus. George felt completely immersed in his character now, understanding not just the words he was speaking, but the emotions and motivations behind them. We bring gifts fit for a king, George announced as they approached the Holy Family. But we come not as rulers ourselves, but as seekers of truth and wisdom. The gift-giving sequence unfolded exactly as they had rehearsed countless times, but tonight it felt fresh and meaningful in a way that practice sessions had only hinted at. When George knelt to present his gift of gold, he felt genuine reverence for the story they were telling and gratitude for the opportunity to be part of something so special. Gold, he said, placing the ornate box carefully beside the manger. For this child shall be a king whose kingdom knows no earthly boundaries. Oliver followed with his frankincense, speaking about the bridge between heaven and earth, and James concluded with myrrh, acknowledging both joy and sorrow in the path of great leadership. Their delivery was perfectly synchronized, each boy building on the other's contributions to create a unified tribute. We have traveled far to find this child, they said together in their final lines. But the greatest journey begins now, as we return to our lands carrying news of hope for all humanity. The wise men's exit was met with warm applause from the audience, and George felt a rush of accomplishment and satisfaction as they made their way back to the side of the stage. They had executed their scene flawlessly, conveying the dignity, wonder, and spiritual significance that the story required. But their job wasn't finished yet. The play continued with additional scenes showing the Holy Family's flight into Egypt, the growth of Jesus into adulthood, and the lasting impact of his teachings on the world. George and his fellow wise men remained in their costumes to participate in the final ensemble pieces that brought the whole production to a close. The concluding musical number involved the entire Year 3 class on stage, singing a contemporary arrangement of Joy to the World that Miss Wright had specifically arranged to showcase the children's diverse vocal talents. George found his place in the alto section and felt his voice blend with those of his classmates in harmonies that seemed to lift the roof off the school hall. As they sang together, George looked out at the audience and saw faces filled with pride, joy, and genuine emotion. In the third row, he could see his mother wiping away tears, while his father applauded enthusiastically and Charlotte clapped along to the rhythm. Throughout the hall, parents and grandparents were clearly moved by the sincerity and skill their children had brought to this timeless story. The final notes of the song rang out, followed by a moment of perfect silence before the audience erupted in sustained applause. The children remained in their positions on stage, beaming with pride and accomplishment, as Miss Davies joined them to take a bow with her young performers. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Davies announced when the applause finally died down, I present the Year 3 class of Thomas's Battersea, who have worked incredibly hard to bring you this evening's performance. Let's give them one more round of applause for their dedication and talent. The second round of applause was even more enthusiastic than the first, and George felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the support and appreciation being shown by the entire school community. This was what he had been hoping for when he started at Thomas's Battersea, the chance to be part of something larger than himself, to contribute his abilities to a shared goal, and to experience the satisfaction of collaborative achievement. As the curtains closed and the children began making their way backstage, George was surrounded by congratulations from his classmates, teachers, and parent volunteers. Everyone was excited and proud, sharing hugs and high fives and rehashing the highlights of the evening's performance. "George, that was absolutely brilliant," Oliver exclaimed, still wearing his purple wise man robes. "I think that was our best performance yet." "Definitely," James agreed. "Everything just felt perfect tonight. The timing, the delivery, the audience response. We really did it." Amelia appeared beside them, having changed out of her narrator costume into a festive dress. "You three were incredible," she said with a huge smile. "I could see the audience hanging on every word during your gift scene." George felt a warm glow of accomplishment and friendship. "We all did brilliantly," he replied. "The whole production was amazing. I'm so proud to be part of this class." Mrs. Thompson approached their group, her face glowing with pride and satisfaction. "I'm absolutely thrilled with how that went," she said, gathering them into a group hug. "You children exceeded every expectation I had."